Well, UFC 267 is literally right around the corner, this video being made in rush time and all. But I still want to take the time to try and break down these fights as best as I can. So let's jump straight into the early prelims. And as we do with every card, let's start with the new bloods. We have Tagir Ulbekov versus Alan Nasimento. 13-1 Tagir Ulbekov takes on 18-5 Alan Nasimento, with a slight height advantage going to Nasimento. Ulbekov, to start out with, you see a heavy tendency towards ground game, since in their one UFC fight they went 5 for 11 on takedowns, racked up 3 minutes and 47 seconds of ground control. They additionally were able to survive on the ground against his opponent Bruno Silva, who has actually won his last 2 fights since this. Striking does seem a little weak, with Bruno was able to keep it close, plus their striking percentage equals strikes absorbed. On the other hand, Nasimento is heavy into the striking, coming off his loss on the Contender Series. The differential was in his favor, but he went 1 for 10 on takedowns, and that's all I can really say about it. Now, the Vegas favorite for this fight is Ulbekov, and I do have to agree because of the strength of his ground game. Nasimento has good striking, but if it goes to the ground, even if he fires off 12 strikes and secures 3 of them, this is a 3-round fight, and being able to rack up any time of ground control tilts it hard in his favor. Magamet Mustafayev versus Damir Ismagulov. The 14-3 Magamet Mustafayev taking on the 23-1 Damir Ismagulov, with a 3-year age and reach difference favoring Ismagulov. Mustafayev comes across as a finisher to me, with all of his 3 UFC wins coming by KO. With that, his land and absorbed are about even, and unshockingly, he's not heavy on takedowns. All 8 of them coming in his last fight, which he did lose. So his biggest issue comes with surviving against higher level opponents, with both losses coming against Kevin Lee and Brad Riddell. Ismagulov is the complete opposite here. He has a pretty large differential between his landed and absorbed, 3.75 landed per minute to 1.90 absorbed. And he's also won all his fights through unanimous decision. He does seem to have takedowns as part of his arsenal, but it's not something that he piles on and drives with. I didn't really see a whole lot that he's taken on competition similar to Lee and Riddell, but if he's building a winning resume, this might still be a pretty even matchup across there. The Vegas odds do favor Damir, and I'm once again agreeing with this. I like Damir striking over Mustafayev. Mustafayev can finish him, but with that differential and the ability to dodge, landing that knockout strike, it's going to be harder than what I think he thinks it is. And the fact that Damir's striking game also seems dangerous, and his ability to go the distance so well, I think is something that puts him a little bit above Mustafayev in this fight. Hu Yaozong versus Alan Amadovsky. We finally have this again because this was supposed to happen back on UFC 264, so I'm just copy-pasting most of my notes with a few added details. The 3-2 Totoro Yaozong takes on the 8-2 Alan Amadovsky, with a 5-inch height advantage to Yaozong and a 2-inch reach advantage to Amadovsky. This fight's a lesson reading between the lines because neither of these fighters have a win in the UFC. Both have fought twice, and their stats are definitely not the gospel here. They do reveal a troubling truth, though. Yaozong does have 4.43 strikes landed per minute to Amadovsky's 0.52. Additionally, used loss to Rashad Cotier, he was at least able to keep within range of the striking total and did rack up 5 minutes of control. It did not matter because Cotier consistently outstruck him, dealing more damage and ending the fight with a percentage of 62 strikes landed to use 52. Amadovsky, however, was completely dominated in terms of striking and securing 4 takedowns. Now, the favorite for this is Amadovsky for Vegas, and I originally was going to deviate and go with Yaozong, and I still am. Yes, Yaozong is dropping from light heavy to middleweight, and yes, that it can be a harsh drop for some fighters, but this was supposed to happen in UFC 264, and now that we're in 267, he's had time to adapt to it and get used to moving at this weight. And in his fights at the heavier weight class, he was able to keep it up with the striking. He kept it close. So you're taking a guy who has a bigger build, who's having to come down more weight classes, up against a guy who looks to be more of the natural 185. His ability to strike, eat strikes, and keep it going, I think is going to be able to overtake Amadovsky here. Next up, we have Makawan Amicron versus Larone Murphy. 16-6, Makawan Mr. Finland Amir Khan takes on 10-0 Larone the Miracle Murphy. Slight age and reach advantage, both going to Larone. Now, Mr. Finland is a definite ground control fighter. At least one takedown in every fight, -1, and averaging 3.63 takedowns across his career. He also seems to be willing to go to the ground with only a 56% takedown defense. How strong his ground presence seems to be, it's not a pressing issue. Striking is his major weakness, 1.4 landed versus a 2.5 absorbed. Murphy, on the other hand, is a little more varied in terms of his takedowns and striking. Does lean more towards the striking, even landed and absorbed. He also, in his wins, he does have a noticeable striking lead. I don't really see that changing with this fight. This fight comes down to, does it go to the ground? If it doesn't, this is Larone. Larone is actually the favorite for this fight, and I'm going to agree. I don't think Makawan's a long shot to win, but I think the variety of ways that Murphy can fight is a little bit more than Amir Khan. I think Amir Khan's ground game is definitely a lot stronger, but I think if Larone can keep it on the feet, keep it at range, if he can keep it in his wheelhouse, his very wide and varied wheelhouse, I think he takes the edge. Shamil Gamzatov versus Micah. Ulbekov, not even a try. 14-0, Shamil Gamzatov looks to keep his 0 against the 15-4 Makal Lord Olekksiejczuk with a 5-year age gap favoring Makal, but a 2-inch height and reach both going to Shamil. Gamzatov in his one UFC fight successfully defended half of all the takedowns, won, and took a significant striking lead heading into the end of the fight. However, he does not seem to be much of a finisher. A majority of his fights, even before the UFC, heading to the decision. Aside from that, he does have a solid striking defense, only 2.13 strikes absorbed. McCall is also a striking heavy fighter, but does seem to struggle with takedowns and submissions, since in every loss he's had, there's been at least one takedown. He does have the ability to finish, but with only 3 UFC wins, I'm not going to go call him a finisher yet, but it does seem to be trending that way. Vegas has these odds very close, favoring Shamil slightly, and I'm going to agree based on takedown success outside of the UFC. Mikhail was a striking heavy fighter outside of the UFC, a lot of striking. Gamzatov showed good takedown game, and with someone who looks to struggle with that even outside the UFC, I think that's something that they're going to see and they're going to use to change the fight here. I mean, maybe he's improved in the time before this, but I still do like Gamzatov for the fight. Albert Durarev versus Roman Kopylov. 14-3, Albert Machete Durarev looks to avoid a lawsuit and be 2-0 in the UFC with a win against 8-1 Roman Kopylov, with a 2-year age difference favoring Kopylov. Durarev, in his one Contender Series fight, won by neck crank submission in the first round. At least I can approximate that their ground game is fairly solid, and they prefer to go down to the ground. Kopylov lost his one UFC fight by rear naked choke in the third, but with Kopylov, I can at least approximate they have a solid striking and the ability to hang in there with some toughness. I don't know how strong their ground game is on terms of a UFC level, and I don't feel it's fair to approximate here. So jumping into the odds here, Vegas favors Durarev, and I honestly do follow it as well. Durarev, in his win, it looked pretty quick, pretty controlled, and pretty dominant. And looking at somebody who lost by a rear naked choke in the third, maybe it was a gas tank issue, maybe it was a mental mistake, but if toughness gets him to a later round where he can finish it off, having that ground game ability and submission ability, that puts him ahead in this fight, in my opinion. Ricardo Ramos versus Zubaira Tukulov. 15-3, Ricardo Carachina Ramos takes on the 19-5 Zubaira Warrior Tukulov, with a 4-year age advantage favoring Ramos, as well as a 4-inch reach advantage. Ramos is a takedown heavy fighter, but is actually also a fairly well-rounded fighter at the same time. Ability to take someone down and finish them, or even finish them on the feet. His strikes landed are equal to absorb, but he also goes on in most fights to take a striking lead throughout. It is worth noting that he has a very solid takedown defense at 73%, so it seems like he wants to control when the fight goes to the ground. Zubaira isn't as even spread across stats, not having a super strong striking and takedown, or even a mix of both. They're more striking heavy focus with an equal landed to absorbed as well. They have thrown takedowns, but it's not something used as a skill more so. It's more or less a situational thing. Like this fight works for it or this fight's optimal for it. Vegas does favor Zubaira by a narrow margin. I am going to disagree. I'm going to go with Ramos. I go with Ramos because I like the spread of his ability more. Yes, he eats it, but I think his normalcy of takedowns gives him a slight edge over the more erratic situational takedowns. Moving on to Amanda Ribas versus Vima Jandiroba. 10-2, Amanda Ribas looks to rebound against a 7-2 Verna Karakara Jandiroba, with Ribas being 5 years younger and having a 2-inch reach advantage. Ribas is strong when it comes to the ground game, having at least one takedown across all of her fights. Additionally, she's able to play off any real ground position, so she certainly isn't afraid to go to the ground in any way. Her striking is also pretty good, but part of me is skeptical of the numbers given because of ground and pound, not so much standing on the feet. Additionally, her accuracy is also a little low in terms of strikes. But Jandiroba is a little more even keel across her stats, though her striking is additionally even across the absorbed and landed. She does, however, have a finishing power, and actually it does have 2 submission wins, which means that her ground game can be used to end a fight, not just rack up points and rack up position time. Now, this fight is odd, because it does have, I did mention that she's a finisher, but Ribas is still the favorite, and I do have to agree. The takedown presence, I think, puts her a little above Jandiroba, because if Jandiroba is trying to shoot the takedown, Ribas seems fine playing off her back or playing from a different position. And I don't know how much Jandiroba wants to go into that or how confident they are with their ground game. But now, to finally start off the main card, we have Magamet Ankalev versus Vulcan Osdamir. 15-1, Magamet Ankalev looks to keep his winning streak alive against a 17-5 Vulcan No Time Osdamir. 3-year age gap favoring Ankalev. He comes into this fight hot on a winning streak, looking at his stats, very skilled striker with a large differential between his landed and absorbed. And even more interesting is that his takedown game is definitely noteworthy. It is not something he relies on heavily, as I've said multiple times already. 33% accuracy, but he seems to use it when he has to or when he can. In his last fight, he had 3 takedowns for 6 minutes of ground control. Technically 5:59, but I'm rounding. Vulcan is a little different. He leans a bit heavier into the striking, which, yes, they're both striking-focused fighters, but does not really have a similar ground game presence. And he does seem to get into closer exchanges than Magamet does. He does have a higher and closer absorbed to landed, so he hits more, but then also gets hit more. Additionally, they also have used takedowns, but this seems to be more of a last-ditch effort or attempt to recover and not really a pushing an advantage or pushing a position thing. Vegas favors Ankalev, and I'm following suit. Ankalev's striking looks to be significantly better than what Osdamir has at this moment, especially with the striking defense, and I don't see this fight going to the ground, and even on the feet, I think Ankalev has the better stand-up. Li Jingliang versus Kazmat Shiemev. 18-6, Li the Leech Jingliang takes on the hype train, or better known as Kazmat Boris Shiemev. 6-year age gap featuring Shiemev as a 2-inch height and 4-inch reach. Now, Li is a streaky fighter. But between all of that, he does have a pretty powerful striking game, which unfortunately means that they subscribe to the swang and bang style of fighting. He has a 42% accuracy with his striking, could be worse, but his power seems to be his equalizer. His ground game exists, but it seems to be a little
It's an autumn. 15 seconds to go. Heavy shots.
This is it.
Wow! And down goes Dos.
Chiamev, on the other hand, is a monster with strong takedown game and brutal ground and pound in addition to knockout power. But I did call him a hype train for a reason. That's not because I hate him. A lot of his stats come from wins against John Phillips, Reese McKee, and the most notable opponent that he's fought so far is Gerald Mearshart, who's not exactly the most well-known name in the UFC. I'm not saying he's a fraud. I'm not saying he's bad. I'm not saying he's a bust. I'm saying, hey, he's got a lot of really good stats. But when you look at who he has those stats against, I don't think we can all jump on this and call him the next greatest fighter ever. I think he's got to fight some other names, a few other people, and then I'll jump on the hype train. And Chimaev is obviously the favorite. And while I call him a hype train, I do like this fight for him. Lee does not look to be consistent, and while Chimaev is coming off a UFC layoff due to COVID, he has been active outside of it, being athletic and working athleticism. His aggressiveness of his takedowns, I think, does give him an edge here. And as I said, Lee is a streaky fighter, so I never really know what product will show up in the ring here. He is coming off a win, but even then, that could be we get an overconfident fighter, we could get someone who's level-headed and in, but I think the pressure that Chimaev is able to generate will be a big factor here. Alexander Volkov versus Marcin Tybura. We have a heavyweight bout with a 33-9 Alexander Drago Volkov looking to get back to winning against the surging 22-6 Marcin Tybura. 3-year age difference serving Volkov, as well as a 7-inch height and 2-inch reach advantage. Volkov is a striker through and through. 4.84 strikes landed, only 2.88 absorbed. He does not lack any power on the guard and knows how to work his 80-inch reach very well. He does have the ability to take opponents down, but it's barely used and almost non-existent. What isn't is his takedown defense and ability to survive on the ground. He was taken down 14 times by Curtis Blades and did manage to go on to lose the fight by decision. And Curtis Blades is very good at ground and pound. Finishing Alistair Overeem on the ground and even taking Derek Lewis down and losing that fight by magical knockout powers in the later rounds. He also does have a 67% takedown defense. Tybura, on the other hand, is very much more focused on the wrestling and grappling. The takedown in all of his wins, -1. His striking is closer to the heavyweight line of equal, getting hit and hitting back just as hard. He does, however, have a 5-fight win streak going. Now, Volkov is the easy favorite here, and while I think it's close because Volkov did struggle hard with Blades, the 14 takedowns, and the heavy takedown game, but Tybura doesn't seem to be the same as Blades with the aggressive and strong takedowns. He does use them, but he seems to be more of a get the one takedown and work that position for as long as possible, which I think is a bit more dangerous because I think that gives Volkov the opportunity to fight it off more and land strikes from there. I am going to go with Volkov because I like his striking so much. I think his natural athleticism puts him at a little bit of an edge here. Islam Makhachev versus Dan Hooker. The 20-1 Islam Makhachev looks to keep his win streak alive against the 20-10 Dan the Hangman Hooker, with a 2-inch height and 5-inch reach advantage, both going Hooker's way. To actually start, Makhachev is a grappling-heavy fighter, with most of his fights having multiple takedowns, averaging 3.3 takedowns over his fight so far, 65% accuracy on those takedowns, and even more important is the 88% takedown defense, controlling when he goes down to the canvas and how he goes down to it. The last really important thing to mention is his striking is kind of negligible, 2.24 landed per minute, and not really a knockout type of artist in that regard. Hooker is, on the other hand, a swing and bang fighter, the equal landed absorbed. He has used takedowns, but they're definitely not something used regularly or as a strength. They're kind of a sparing effort in his part. It's more of a matchup thing than anything else. He does have knockout power in spades. I don't know how much it matters in this fight, especially because he's taking it more short notice stepping in for this opponent. And I think Islam Makhachev said it best, well, his team said it best himself. Hooker's here for the money, and his best chance to win is to land that lucky shot. And this fight definitely favors Makhachev, and unsurprisingly, I agree fully. Hooker takes this fight short notice. Props to him getting the money, which should be more, but we're not going to touch on that in this video. And I just think Islam Makhachev's aggressiveness on takedowns and controlling of the ground game gives him more advantage here. But to the title fights now. Peter Yan versus Corey Sandhagen. Now, this fight should have been Yan Sterling 2, but now instead we have 15-2 Peter knee to the head Yan taking on the 14-2 Corey Sandman Sandhagen, with a 4-inch height difference and 3-inch reach, both favoring Sandhagen. Now, Yan is normally a very well put together fighter with good striking and equally good striking defense. He does have knockout power, but definitely doesn't seem to be his focus. Since in his UFC fights, he only has 2 TKO KO wins. One of those being a brutalization of Jose Aldo that should have been stopped earlier. The other part of his game I do want to touch on is takedowns and trips. They tend to be very effective at disrupting momentum, getting the points he needs, and giving him in position to land some strikes that can be very effective. Sandhagen is a bird of a similar feather. He does tend to hit and get hit a little more, and he has a ground game that he uses a bit more like a wrestler and more effective, but also is not the main focus of how he fights. Additionally important is the fact that Sandhagen is a little bit more of a finisher compared to Jan, with 9 of his wins coming by finish. Now, Jan is the favorite here. Unsurprisingly, I do agree. But I think it's closer than the betting odds and even how the stats show. The last fight proved 2 things. Jan's an idiot, and Jan will make mental mistakes. Now, you can argue it was a high-pressure situation, but you sign up to be a UFC fighter, man. It's gonna be a high-pressure situation. It doesn't excuse what he did. It makes you go, okay, at that point in time, he was not mentally aware enough to not knee a downed opponent. And that's a different argument for whether the rule's good or not at any time. But he will make mental mistakes, and that cost him the fight. So if he gets pressured and makes another mental mistake, that could swing the odds in Sandhagen's favor. But that's sort of just shooting to the wind at this point. But the final fight of the night. The light heavyweight. 28-8. Jan Polish Power Blachowicz, looking to keep his belt against the 32-7 Glover Teixeira. Jan taking a 3-year age advantage at 38 and a 2-inch reach advantage over Glover Teixeira. Now, Jan is a powerhouse when it comes to striking, with the ability to easily put people to sleep. This leads to a fairly close absorbed landed, leaving power to be his deciding factor. He also has been able to handle himself on the feet and not rely on finishing his opponent. Additionally, his takedown game has the ability to be very effective as well, and he can stack it to wear his opponents down, looking at the Adesanya fight, for example. Does have 2 submission wins, don't think it matters for this fight, but I'm mentioning it anyway. Teixeira, on the other hand, is a takedown and ground heavy fighter. 2.04 average across his career. His striking is about even across absorbed and landed, but he's been able to maintain leads in fights and get to the end of the fight. And he does have some degree of finishing power, but I believe that in part that's due to takedowns and ground and pound. Now, Jan is the favorite fighter here, and I think part of that's the age gap and part of that's the fact Jan Blachowicz will knock a man's head off. But if this fight hits the canvas, that's where it goes to, I think, who's on top and how much control they have. Glover's ground game is very good. I believe he's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He can play off the back. He can play from side control. He can play from top control. If he controls a takedown in any way, I think Jan might be in a bad spot because I think Glover's very good at controlling what happens on the ground. I don't know if it goes to the ground, but if it does, I think we need to keep close to the TV and keep an eye on what happens.